Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast, your weekly source to keep up with PowerShell. Learn about stories from people in the community who have made it to the top, people who are still on the grind, connecting dots and sharing their passion for PowerShell, because PowerShell does have one of the best communities on the internet. Well, I guess it's just not the internet, it's the world, it's the internet, it's the everything, okay? PowerShell rocks. We have a very special interview. This is actually technically a returning guest because I think I had him on a bar sessions in the past, but welcome Anthony, the PoSh Wolf, to the podcast. Welcome, Anthony. And you're fresh off the heels of presenting at PowerShell Wednesday as well. So we're getting you a double time today.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew. Yeah, I love the Howell introduction.
Anthony Howell, it's just in my head. I always hear a howl after I say the PoSh Wolf. And so I got to just let it out a little bit, or else it'll just cook in this brain all day.
That's where the PoSh Wolf came from.
Did it?
The PoSh, yes. I also ran a consulting business for a short amount of time called Howell IT. Don't know it? Howl it.
Oh, nice. Got it. Dude, the marketing's on point with that one. So we were talking before we went live, which we went live a minute ago. So we were just recently talking about we have a lot of shared background. And I think we initially met in 2018 at PowerShell Summit, which was both of our first years. But before we dive into that, I want to hear about like your initial early days with PowerShell leading into the summit, like how you kind of crossed that path.
Yeah, that's from early days with PowerShell to the summit encompasses about 5 years of my career.
Wow.
So wait, was it 5 years? No, it's more than that, because my first time was in 2018, and my first like really career job in IT, because I worked in like a Geek Squad call center. Don't recommend it. I did like a field technician stuff for a medical equipment manufacturer, but I landed like a desktop support role in, I believe it was 2011, 2012, somewhere in there. You can check LinkedIn if you're really curious. But I landed this job because I had just sat for a Windows 7 certification. And they were specifically looking for some Windows 7 stuff. And when I started this company, it was about, I think when I started, it was around 80 people. It was like a small hardware software company, local here in Eugene. And funny story, I moved to Eugene because my now wife was here going to school at the University of Oregon. And then, I proposed while we were in Italy, and then she said, well, if you want to get serious, like, why are you up in, I was in Portland at the time. So I moved down to Eugene, got a local job, and the rest is history. We now have 4 kids.
Wow.
But unrelated to PowerShell background there, sorry.
Hey, we're all humans outside of the code.
Yep, absolutely. And even in the code, we're human.
Very true.
But so I landed this job, a small local company. And I had this one Windows 7 cert. I had 6 months at a part-time help desk from my 1 year at university. So I was green, and my boss, who was half of the IT department, so I was the other half when I got hired. He was like, Anthony, I'm an old, and this is all true. Like, he was an old school Linux guy. Spent 20 years in the Navy. Was only working still because he had an airplane. So he had to pay for his airplane. And he was like, Anthony, there is no desktop on our Linux servers. And I was like, cool. Back then I was like, what is Linux? I don't know. It's this open source thing. And he was like, and I need you to get to the point where you can manage our Windows servers that way. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, how do you do that? And his response was, I don't know. I'm a Linux guy. So what I did is the first 6 months there, I got, let's see, what are the CompTIA basic certifications? Net Plus, Security Plus?
Security Plus, yeah.
Oh, I skipped A Plus, but I got Sec Plus, Net Plus. So I had my Windows 7, and I also started my Exchange certification, and this was Exchange 2010. And this is when PowerShell was starting to be a big thing in Exchange, and so there was a lot of PowerShell in there. And so I was like, okay, so PowerShell is the way to learn this. And so I talked my boss into buying PowerShell with a month of lunches. And that was my like PowerShell Bible to start with. I think I've got a couple other books up on my shelf. Like I have like I have one of the early PowerShell books written probably by Don Jones or somebody. But it was a lot of trial and error for me. I had spent 1 year at university where I was a computer science major, and this is a little. I always feel a little embarrassed saying this, but calculus is the reason I stopped being a computer science major. I've just barely passed. I blame it on the professor, not on my intelligence, but my wife might disagree. And so I had a year of C++. And so I thankfully had at least a like programming 101 to learn PowerShell. So I was familiar with loops, with variables, and with basic programming concepts. And so PowerShell, while different, was not completely foreign, thankfully. And one of the cool things about this job is that it was a very typical like Microsoft setup. So we had Windows Server, we had Active Directory, we had Exchange, we had file servers, domain control, or like Active Directory and domain controllers. And so one of the first ways that I learned PowerShell is reporting out of these. So like Active Directory, get a user. On all of our endpoints, we had PDQ inventory. So getting inventory from all our devices, we used PDQ. For deploying stuff, we used PDQ, which is great. And I know PDQ sponsors this, so I wanted to call that out.
Yeah, shout out PDQ.
Yeah. I don't have anything bad to say about PDQ. We did a lot, and I wrote a lot of scripts specifically that were used with PDQ, and it's been more than a decade since I wrote a PDQ script, so I don't remember much about that. But I owe a lot of my early PowerShell stuff, to PDQ deploying inventory, because that's what we had, and we got a lot of value out of that. And I think one of the biggest ones that I loved about it was that it had back then, I don't know, no idea what it looks like now, but you could, the subscription had automatically updating, package deployments, which was nice because
package library.
Yeah, there we go. Figuring that out was not too easy. How to keep that updated.
Even the concept for me, we have a lot of similarities in our background, but even the concept of like a silent installation was new to me, or passing parameters to like an MSI or an EXE. I was like, what is a freaking parameter in this context? But
like I can remember having that thought, like, why would you ever want a silent installation? And then like standing up in like a cube farm of 80 people and be like, oh, I don't have time for that. That's why.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that was a big part for me, was it was able to offload a lot of manual work that my job was responsible for. Like keeping computers up to date is a big task if you don't have any tools to help you. And it really freed me up to get some early wins, and then free me up to do more PowerShell stuff to get even more wins, which I think is similar to kind of what happened to you. Yeah,
absolutely. Talk about updating. Like I can remember sitting I can't remember whatever night we did updates back then. Staying late, and I'm remoted into, it wasn't a big, I think we had like 10 or 15, maybe 20 servers, wasn't it huge, but being remoted into as many as I could, and then, hitting check for updates, and then, going to the next window, and, and then automating that with, initially, was PS Windows Update a thing back then? Man, I don't remember.
I don't think so.
But we ended up automating with, group policy and WSUS. Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore, or is going out of support or whatever,
or something.
Yeah. But another thing that really helped me, because I was in an environment where I was the only Windows admin. Like we had a manufacturing facility that like I don't really know what his title was, but he was like the Linux guy. For that facility, because their equipment was all running Linux and embedded systems, and so he wasn't technically in the IT department. Between him and my boss, like it was Linux everything. So I found a community in Spiceworks back then, and what's really cool is going to like the PowerShell Summit now. Is I've seen people where I'm like, oh, your name is Bill Kindle. Weren't you on Spiceworks back in the day? He's like, oh yeah.
Love Bill Kindle.
Yes. Yeah. And one of my claims to fame, like early on in PowerShell, and one of the reasons I actually got into like, and blogging and stuff, was I wrote a script back then that would pull installed software from the registry. So instead of using WMI to do it, it would just parse the registry, tell you all the installed software on a local or a remote system, and it would do it instantly. Well, I mean, basically instantly. In the Microsoft world, we'll call it instantly because WMI takes forever. And that script was like a top 10 script back when Spiceworks used to, they had a script leaderboard. It was a top 10 script. I was very proud of that back in the day. And I even put that on my resume, and I got some nice questions about that in interviews back then.
That's what it's all about. Like when you do that stuff and share it with the public, it can serve as a way to like build confidence in an interview. Like you go into there already writing solutions that have worked for like thousands of people. That's a pretty, like, I'm going to trust that person more than I would Joe Schmo, who has a lot of nice little bullet points on his resume.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And that's where I found, putting stuff in the community, sharing scripts, and then people actually use it. Like that puts a lot of like weight behind, like, I do know what I'm doing, right? I don't just say I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. And it feels good too, because you're like, all right, I ran this on 1,000 machines in my environment. But when you put it in the outside world, it's like your efforts are multiplied. It could be on millions of machines this thing is ran, which is kind of fun.
Yep. Force multiplication. Yeah.
Boom. Love it.
Yeah.
So we met in 2018. Were you speaking in 2018? Because you were a long-time speaker at PowerShell Summits, as far as my memory goes back.
So that's a funny story, how I got to the summit in 2018. So back then, I was working for a local credit union here in town. If you've never worked at a credit union, it's very much a very strong cultural phenomena. Like, you show up, to these big company meetings, and everybody's all happy and excited, and there's chanting involved. It reminds me of like, some of these religious activities, right? But it's all very member focused, and I love that. It was a great work experience. But they had a year where they're like, all right, we're going to send, we have budget to send people to conferences. And I went to my boss. I was like, hey, I love PowerShell. I found this PowerShell conference. Please send me. And it is an inexpensive conference, relatively speaking. And we had people that were flying, across the country to this conference that cost $3,000 just for the ticket. And I could have done this conference for, I think back then I was spending, I don't remember what the ticket price was. I'm not even going to guess, but I could do it for a lot less, the whole thing for less than $3,000. Because it's also, I'm on the West Coast, so Eugene to Bellevue it's like a $40 train ride. It's very inexpensive. I mean, back then I had a car that I could take. Right now we only have one car, and whoever has the kids has the car. So
yep, same here.
And so I said, hey, I would like to go to this conference, and he said, you're already really good at PowerShell. You don't need to go to the PowerShell conference. And I didn't know how to take that. I was like, is that a compliment or a you don't want me to do so much PowerShell kind of response? And I was really disappointed. And within a week, I made the decision that it wasn't within a week, because I asked him early on, but at some point within, fairly close to the summit, I decided I'm just going to take the PTO and I'm going to take myself. Because I was like, this just feels like what I want to do with my career. Like I want to go to conferences. I think he suggested like a Citrix conference, and nothing bad about Citrix. We used it at this place, but that wasn't really where I saw myself going. And so I fill out the registration form. I got the response, hey, sorry, our registration closed. It was literally the day before.
Oh no.
So we're going to put you on the wait list. And so what I did is I sent an email to the organizers, and I said, hey, by the way, I'm in Eugene. So if you guys have anything that comes up last minute, like, I don't need to book flights. I just need to book a hotel. I don't care if it's not in the hotel block. I can take anything last minute. And Don Jones responded, and he said, we'll put you at the top of the list.
Wow.
Yep. And what do you know? Somebody backed out I think it was with just a couple weeks to go. And they said, hey, can you make it? I still remember getting this email like on a Sunday while we were out shopping. I'm like, oh crap, we better hurry up so I can get home and claim this ticket.
Dude, that's awesome. And that was kind of the start of a journey, right? Since you've been going so many years ever since then, I guess it was a good experience.
Absolutely, man. My first PowerShell conference, like when my boss said, like, you know a lot of PowerShell, like like I said, I wasn't sure how to take that. But showing up to the PowerShell conference, I was like, holy crap, like I don't know a thing about PowerShell. Like that was my first exposure to like like module templating. I remember I sat in a session, I remember, forget the guy's name, one of the European guys. He was talking about, debating module structure. And I was like, there's more than one way to structure a module? Like, what? And like using build scripts. So seeing Pisake or invoke build, like those were the things that I was exposed to for the first time. And it was amazing. Like it was absolutely worth taking myself 100%. And coincidentally, the week before the summit, I put in my notice at work. And it was not being able to go to the conference I wanted to was part of it. But we had a new VP that was all metrics focused, and I was not happy. And so I quit my job. I ended up not having anywhere to go to. Thought I could be a consultant. Funny story, I'm a terrible sales guy, so I make a terrible consultant. I didn't know that was a requirement. But I quit my job right before going to the summit. So I was also asking around if people were hiring, but I ended up, trying to consult for a bit, and that was, like I said, didn't work out well. But I did not speak at that summit. But in 2019, I did give a lightning demo. So for anyone listening that's not familiar, lightning demos are an opportunity for community members to get up and spend just, I don't know, was it 4 or 5 minutes, like giving a quick demo on something you've been working on. And I gave a lightning demo on a module that I was working on at the time that I thought would be useful, called curl to PS. It just converts, you give it a curl command and it converts it to the invoke REST method syntax for PowerShell. And I got like an overwhelming, like positive response, like people coming up after me, like, dude, that is so cool. Where can I find your code? And I was like, wow, I just thought this was something cool. So I wanted to show it off. So I turned it into a module based on that. And then applied to be a speaker at, let's see, that was 2019 at the 2020 summit, which is the one they canceled because of COVID. I think 2021 was the virtual one. I might be misremembering, but yeah, I have been speaking ever since at the summit. It's a great experience. Like you have no idea. Like I tell people I'm going to be at a conference, and they're like, "Oh yeah, which conference?" I'm like, "Ah, it's the PowerShell conference, and I'm going to be speaking at it." And they're like, "What? You're a speaker?" It's like, and like the PowerShell conference is so relaxed. Everyone's so chill and so friendly, and I really feel like it's a, if everyone's ever thought about speaking at a conference, like this is the conference to speak at for a first time, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a great one. Gosh, our stories have a lot in common, especially now that I learned more about it.
Yeah.
I remember 2018 was my first year also. And I did the scholarship route. So that was the first year they ever did a scholarship pre-on-ramp. But I remember being in the back of a car with some coworkers at some kind of crappy local security conference. It was fine. But it was, it lacks the community feel, which is, to me, is where you get most of the stuff. But I remember being in the back and like getting the email like, hey, you've been accepted and blah, blah, blah. And I was freaking out. And then, that conference has been a life changer for so many people, or at least a career changer. But oftentimes that kind of translates into your life. When you gain the confidence, you can start having more agency over where your career grows because you are confident enough and you have the actual skill set that people are looking for. Yeah, It's just such a magical place. And it's so cool to hear that so many people share that kind of experience of it being that type of non-negotiable. Like for me, it's also non-negotiable. I'm going to PowerShell Summit every year. If you're not going to send me employers, I will leave you. And I left my last employer because they said, hey, we are not going to send you to PowerShell Summit this year. So I said, all right, let's talk to some friends, and boom, one thing led to another. And now I'm here at PDQ and they're sending me every year. That's awesome.
Yeah. My employer. So I got to this employer because I was at a startup that ran out of money and I got laid off with no notice. Well, let me rephrase that. I got told I was going to be laid off on Monday on the prior Friday. By the way, Monday was the last day of the month, so you lose health insurance too. So I was desperate, and this was at the end of February, and I was already signed up to go to the summit in April of that year. This is probably 3 years ago, or 2 years. No, 2 years ago. And so I landed this job. I was so fortunate. I had a previous manager who liked me, came up with a job. I was 2 weeks between jobs. With kids, this was like a life saver for me. But they said, "Hey, you're too new. We're not going to pay you to go to the summit." It's like, God dang it. But being a speaker, I got a free ticket. And last year they did pay for me, thankfully, which was really nice.
Nice.
And being on the West Coast and close by, and I stayed down the street a little ways at the cheaper hotel. It was like $1,000 for me to go. And then this year,
Wow.
for whatever reason, they said, "Hey, we're not going to pay it." But I work for a healthcare software company, so there's a lot of uncertainty, especially with the political climate here in the United States. So I get it.
Better safe than sorry kind of thing. I get it. Yeah. But it's definitely the type of thing where it's worth going for sure. Even if you got to
100%.
kind of save up budget, whatever the case may be. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, hey, next week, the week after this goes live, PS Conference Europe is going to be starting. And I will be there for the first time to take in that European experience of the PowerShell community, which to me, it's the people and people being comfortable enough to be themselves and to grow and ask questions. And very curious to see what I can learn there and be immersed in that beautiful PowerShell community vibe, which is just radiating everywhere. Awesome.
It is, dude. Our story would have been the same. I almost went to PS Conf EU this year.
Really?
I applied to be a speaker. They didn't take me. But I almost went ahead and just booked a ticket just to go. But it didn't work out budget wise. And I couldn't justify, an international trip at work if they weren't going to pay for the North America one.
Yeah, I totally feel that. Yeah, I was almost paying my own way to Europe this year, but pulled a few strings, made it happen. Because it's just the type of thing where I've wanted to go for so many years and just to experience it, because so many people, it's transformative for them in the same way we're sharing how PowerShell Summit was transformative for us. So I want to be able to see that and kind of experience a little bit of what's going on over there.
Yeah, and the culture too. That's
for
nice.
Sure.
Something different.
I mean, yeah, it's hard to say, oh, no, I'm not going to go to Sweden. I'll take that. But it's fun. It's fun stuff. And no matter where you are in the world, if these events are inaccessible to you, we all have different financial situations. We all live in different places, all that kind of thing. You got to find some community to get involved in some capacity. Obviously, in person for a week, it is like there's a lot of opportunity to grow and form relationships and learn and ask questions. But there are other ways you can get connected with people. Join PowerShell Wednesdays is one you just presented at today. Every single week, there is a community where you can get out, you can ask questions. And it's been so exciting to see people grow. We've had people who were straight up beginners, couldn't even run 2 commands, didn't know what a pipeline was. And now all of a sudden they've written a module and things like that. You got to get out there and find your people and ask questions, meet people, all that kind of thing. For me, whenever I talk to people and hear their journeys, oftentimes the most transformative part is when they actually start asking questions or getting involved or meeting people. All that kind of thing is just very transformative for what it can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I really struggled with was the asking questions part. Because I've professionally I've been in positions where I was supposed to know a lot of stuff.
Yep.
And so, when you're in a meeting and you're like, so this is a really fun example, but someone says a word that you don't, understand. And as an English is my first language, and it still happens. Someone says a word that I don't know what the meaning is. This is really funny. I always ask, what does that word mean in this context, to make it sound a little less intimidating.
Yeah, and I think that it's a point that I love reiterating. It's like the people who know what they're doing, they appreciate and respect that, because there's a lot of people who are in that Dunning-Kruger kind of pit of whatever it is, where you think you know everything or need to front like you know everything, when in reality, nobody knows everything. We all kind of fall into that trap. For me, it was really transformative whenever I was able to stop, because I was like the PowerShell wizard at work. I could solve anything with PowerShell compared to them. And so I would let that get to my head. I'd have to have an answer to every single question we'd bring up in a meeting. And that kind of creates a bit of a toxic environment. And eventually I was able to be like, okay, wait, it feels good for my ego to be the PowerShell wizard. But the truth is I learned just like everybody else, one step at a time. I wasn't just born, I know it all. No, I struggled quite a bit. And getting to the point where you can be the person who's technically, proficient and has some respect and some wins underneath your belt, while also demystifying that kind of fake situation where you have to act like you know all the things. It just opens up a lot of room for other people to grow as well, and for you to actually be solving problems rather than just giving fluffy answers.
Yeah, and I think it also opens the door for collaboration as well. I mean, because you might find that, the company I work for right now, I've written some audit scripts for systems like for Entra ID. I haven't touched Entra ID professionally in years, and so it gave me a chance to work with some of the guys on that team, the team that handles it, which is great. Now I have that relationship.
Yeah, and for me, it was like, okay, I can write all the PowerShell solutions, but at a certain point, I want to move on to the next project and not maintain all my stuff. So I started like an internal user group and started like working one-on-one with the people so they could start writing commands for my modules. And we used a lot of the templating stuff like Plaster or whatever to kind of make that easier for them so they don't have to have quite as much understanding of like best practice, and they could start contributing. And then all of a sudden, more work gets done. PowerShell is even more well-respected within our org. And whenever I left the job, my scripts wouldn't die. That was kind of a big thing to me because I like doing things in a sustainable way. And if all this time I've spent writing stuff just dies whenever I leave, well, that's kind of an L. Not like I'm going to financially benefit from it, but still, like from the perspective, you mentioned force multiplication earlier. I'm all about that. I'm trying to make the best use of my time, whether it's earning money or just doing good and helping the next whoever fills my shoes.
Yeah, absolutely. And the company I work at now, this is the first place I've ever been at where there was a guy already doing what you just described. He had started an education series for PowerShell.
Yeah.
So I was able to start at this company after was most of the way through that, and so there's a lot of camaraderie around that here, which is awesome.
Yes, and what a cool story. What a cool journey you've had in PowerShell, and you've also been working on some very cool projects. And I want to talk about those, but let's pause for a moment. And when we come back, I want to ask you about some of the more fun and creative PowerShell projects that you've worked on. Stay tuned.
Sure.
This is the PowerShell Podcast. PowerShell Podcast.
Most of you know the PowerShell Podcast is sponsored and made possible by PDQ. I've had questions from listeners asking, what's PDQ and what do you do? Well, we help IT teams automate endpoint management. PDQ Connect is our cloud-based tool for real-time software deployment, patching, scripting, remote access, and vulnerability management. It's fast, flexible, and built for people who just want things to work. If you want to see it in action, head to pdq.com/podcast and check out our interactive demo. No signups, no emails, no credit card, just a fast and easy way to explore how it works. That's pdq.com/podcast. Automated endpoint management that doesn't slow you down. Now back to our interview with the PoSh Wolf. Welcome back. All right, Anthony, you've worked on a lot of non-traditional PowerShell projects, let's call them. You mentioned doing some stuff for Utopia. What was that other game? It's not Elden Ring, but the other one you worked on, was it Oblivion you did some stuff?
Bethesda games. Skyrim specifically is what I focused on, but also Fallout 4. Yeah.
So what was up with that? When did you start dabbling in using PowerShell for less work-related things, you could say?
Well, the way I like to think about it is when you get really good at something, like when you get really good at using a hammer, everything becomes a nail, right? And so I got really good at PowerShell. I wanted to, expand my horizons. And I really feel like I've had jobs where I don't get challenged enough. And so I like to challenge myself in that way. And so I used to play a game called Utopia. It's a really ancient, like browser-based, a numbers only. It's not even a video game. It's just a game. You log in, you have a province in a kingdom, you have armies, you have peasants, you have land you have to build and maintain, and it's a whole thing. It's all statistics based. So anyone that's played that game for any amount of time is familiar with spreadsheets. I don't play the game anymore. But there is a mechanic in the game where two kingdoms go to war, and to understand how one kingdom is doing versus the other, you have to compare, province statistics and kingdom statistics. You have to do that over time. And the game publishes a JSON file of all stats every 15 minutes. And so what I did was I using PowerShell, because PowerShell works great with JSON, download that JSON file, parse it out, and then track the statistics. And I just did some local JSON saving. I didn't have any database stuff back then. But then I used a module, PS Graph? Man, probably should have looked that up before mentioning it. But there's a graphing based PowerShell module, or no, it was PSHTML. That's what it was. And then there's some graphing components in it. And so I would build graphs. And so for the kingdom that I was in, we could, have this, trending lines. We could see if we're winning or losing the war. It was really cool. But I did all that 100% using PowerShell, and I would throw the HTML files in an Azure storage account and just turn on the static site stuff. And what was really cool is with PSHTML, I could put, I could have multiple pages. I could have summary pages and then link to other pages. And so it was pretty cool. I'd never implemented any kind of analytics or anything. So I really have no idea how useful it was for anybody, but I got a lot of value out of it. So it was totally worth the effort to use it.
Did you get promoted in the guild?
No, I didn't have, I didn't
Still
have
a peasant.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, I mean, the way the game worked was you typically have, a couple of people, but you elect a king. And generally speaking, everyone's in Discord. We went from, IRC to Slack to Discord, but everyone has it predetermined before the age starts. And yeah, it's a whole thing.
Interesting. And how were you interacting with the game? Was it just files, or did you have to use some .NET stuff?
Oh, it was all browser based.
Oh, okay.
So you log in, you have a UI, but like I said, there's no graphics. It's all numbers. So you click through different pages to see and it's been a few years since I've played, so I'm a little rusty, but you have a page for managing all of your land. So you can build different buildings that give you different buffs, and depending on the percentage of your land that is applied to a certain building, you get a certain amount of that buff.
And then you nerdy.
Well, oh my goodness, my wife hated it because the game progressed in real time. So every hour, the way it worked was that a week in real life was a year in the game. And so a day in real life was a month in the game, and an hour in real life was a day in the game. So every hour the game ticked. So that means that the highest performing provinces logged in every single hour. So you can understand how that might be a little bit of an addiction at some point for some people, especially if you're playing in a competitive kingdom.
Right. Well, gosh. And that was your first kind of video game interaction
with PowerShell. Oh yeah. And that was really easy because it was all JSON, and PowerShell works great with JSON, convert to and from.
What about Discord stuff? Because for those who don't know, I manage the PDQ Discord, discord.gg/PDQ. Check out the PowerShell scripting channel. But you're doing some stuff with Discord, because I was playing, I checked out their API, and I kind of tuned out kind of quick, we'll say, because I ran into some issues with authentication, and I was just like, this is a lot to troubleshoot right now. I'll just pay for a bot. But what's going on with Discord and you? Sure.
So we're gonna go back a little ways here. So I have a friend group. We've known each other since high school. I'm not gonna tell you how many years it's been, because it's a few. A number of years ago, we sat down and we said, we want to stay connected. And so we agreed that every week, and the day and time has changed, but every week we get on, we play games, video games. And I think it started when we were playing Ark Survival Evolved. We needed a server. And I was like, well, I'm an IT guy. I've got this old Optiplex sitting around. I'll just use that as a server. And so that's what it was. And so what I used for remote management was I had, I think, a TeamViewer set up. And so I said, hey, if you guys want to get on, you use TeamViewer to do it. But it was a whole thing where, sometimes I had to, shut it down. And so being able to remote manage it wasn't easy. So that evolved into, I put it on a Hyper-V host. And I set up a hybrid runbook worker. So with Azure Runbooks, you can run stuff locally. And so I said, hey guys, if you want to start the server, you just hit this HTTP endpoint, and here's the PowerShell code to do it. These guys are not technical. They literally always ask me to start it. So I was like, okay, well, that doesn't work. So I said, what if I could integrate this into Discord as a bot, and then put the VM in Azure? So back when I had a consulting business, my business, I registered as a Microsoft partner, so I get some Azure credits for pretty inexpensive. And so I started running the servers in Azure. And so to start and stop a server, it's all API calls, right? And so I put together, I needed to do this inexpensively because I didn't want to run a VM 24/7. And so initially I used PoshBot, but there was no way for me to run PoshBot without running it all the time. And I didn't want to pay for a VM 24/7. So I just wanted to make my life really difficult, and I built a bot. And I have an example in my GitHub on how to build a Discord bot with PowerShell in Azure Functions. And it is not a great user experience, because when you have a Discord bot, even if it's a REST-based Discord bot, it has to respond back to Discord within 3 seconds for the interaction to actually succeed. And so there's a guy whose blog I mentioned. I gave a talk on doing this bot at one of the summits I was at. So if you want to check my GitHub, the Posh Wolf /sessions, I talk a lot about. There's a one on Discord. He actually built a C# based front door for it, so that the C# starts up in less than 3 seconds and responds back and defers the response. And I did all this using the Discord.net library. So instead of so we just came off of PowerShell Wednesday. I was talking about .net in PowerShell. So this is the way that I learned a lot about how to use .net in PowerShell. But I went through all the effort of understanding how he built his C# based front door, and I was like, well, why not just write this whole thing in C#? And so I wrote a proof of concept in C#, and then I had this realization. I was like, I don't know what it was. I call it a pre-midlife crisis, but I just had this realization that here I was, all of my scripting and programming was all PowerShell C#. I was Azure. I was specialized in Windows and Windows Server, and I was like, I got to learn something different. And so I threw all of that out, and I rewrote everything in Go. And so what's interesting is going from PowerShell to Go is actually, there's a lot of similarities. So I'm planning on submitting for a PowerShell to Go talk at the PowerShell Summit next year. We'll see if they take it. We'll see. But what I found at the end of the day is I had put so much effort into this Discord bot to where I could start a server, I could stop a server, and it was automatically checking for server usage. Because what I found is what these guys wouldn't always remember to shut it down. And, these guys being my buddies, so whatever. So it would often run, longer than we needed it to. And so it would, I have it set up so it would automatically stops based on, idle time. So if someone hasn't been logged in for a certain amount of time, it'll just shut it down. And it's in Azure, so it deallocates and it doesn't charge me for it. And so I'm actually, and this is just a little a teaser, but I'm actually trying to start a business where I'm managing game servers and charging for them hourly. So if anybody watching this or listening to this is interested, definitely reach out to me. I'm planning on starting a closed alpha and then sometime in the next month or so.
Nice. That is quite an interesting journey.
Yeah,
from PowerShell.
Yep, I'll start with PowerShell. Yeah,
that's funny. That's awesome, actually. And it makes a lot of sense when you lay it out like that. Like, why isn't it done that way? Like, by the hour seems more resource efficient, right? Just for the planet, but also for the wallet.
Oh yeah,
resources.
I mean, if you could spend 4 cents an hour for a server in Azure, or $15, and you only play it, in our case, we together only play it for 2 or 3 hours a week. Sometimes more if we have like Memorial Day weekend or something. But it also allows someone to start and stop it and play during the week. Like someone one of them was on this morning playing. I don't know why it wasn't working, but whatever.
It's a sick day for sure, right? Definitely take some PTO for that. It's awesome. And you mentioned PoshBot, because that is also kind of a shared thing that I had for a while, which was taking my scripts and making them available to my team in Teams. So I wrote the Teams connector or whatever. That was my first dive into classes for PowerShell.
That's awesome.
It was confusing as hell at the time. So
it always is the first time.
It's fun, but there are some limitations, like you kind of mentioned. When it comes to it, you got to always be running it. So we had to have a dedicated server for it. All that kind of fun stuff.
And for me, that wasn't cost or it was cost prohibitive. And it's not a lot of cost, but the thing is like I'm like, a few dollars a month, man, that's cost prohibitive kind of thing.
Yes, dude. I remember those days where it was like, oh, dude, I got to pay $20 for this thing. I don't think I can pay $20 for this thing.
Yeah. And here's the thing, running a Discord bot in Azure Container Apps is very inexpensive because maintaining that the session, it stays technically inactive because it takes so little CPU to do that. Just by the way, it's very cheap.
Nice.
I don't know what the numbers are, but it doesn't cost very much for me to run my bot.
So you said at PowerShell Wednesday, you're not a .NET developer, but I mean, is that fair to say? You're a developer.
Yes.
We can say you're a developer for sure.
And I did. I mean, I don't know. Depends on. Sure, maybe. No, I don't know. I did write one whole project, from start to finish in .NET, and it all worked. Was it up to best practice? I don't know. I mean, one of the things I did, and this is what I love about GitHub Copilot, is as long as you use it in such a way that you're not depending on it, like it is so useful to learn things. Like, I would write stuff and I'd say, hey, what do you think about this? What best practices would you suggest or whatever? And then instead of using like, I could get on my high horse here, but like using the agentic mode just feels like it removes me from the stuff I enjoy doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I feel that you want to stay in the zone.
Yeah. But I had a lot of fun with that.
That is awesome. I'll have to keep, where can we find you on social media if we want to kind of follow along what's going on?
Oh, the PoSh Wolf. I mean, github.com/the PoSh Wolf, x.com/the PoSh Wolf. I don't post there anymore. I focus on Blue Sky instead, but I'm LinkedIn as the PoSh Wolf. I mean, everywhere that I think I had a Reddit account. My wife looked it up recently. She said, "Hey, why is your Reddit account suspended?" I haven't been on Reddit in so long. I was like, I have no idea. She was like, "What were you doing?"
That's funny.
Nothing. Not logging in is what I was doing.
Got banned.
Yeah, something. I don't know. I haven't logged into it.
So you mentioned PowerShell Wednesday. What was the general gist of what you talked about today?
Using .NET in PowerShell. Because one of the things I found, like especially with like the Discord stuff, is that a .NET library already exists. Why would I rewrite everything in PowerShell? And there are plenty of people. There are some strong personalities in the PowerShell community that believe that it should be 100% PowerShell, and I understand that. It makes it things a lot easier to understand and more approachable if you don't already know .NET. But it's really not that hard to learn .NET if you know PowerShell, and that's kind of the connection I was trying to make. Is there's a lot of like even when I found that I was only writing C# in .NET, I would still have my PowerShell console, and I would do type discovery in PowerShell instead of in C#. Even though with VS Code, with the right extensions, you can get a lot of rich data out of .NET. And if you want to jump for Visual Studio, I mean, the developers I work with swear by it, so it must work.
Yeah, it's a behemoth, but I think it's really worth noting that PowerShell's cool, but the .NET ecosystem is very mature. There is a lot of .NET developers and a lot of libraries that you can borrow from. Absolutely. An incredibly large amount, honestly.
Yeah, and why rewrite it if someone has already written it in a way that you can use? Yeah, that's what I found with the Discord.NET. Like you mentioned, like trying to figure out the login stuff. Like with the Discord.NET, you create the REST client, you give it your token, it's logged in.
Yep. And I think that, there's a lot of things you need to learn along your PowerShell journey. If PowerShell is your first language, dabbling in .NET should be on that list at some point. If you can find an excuse to where it makes sense for a project you're working on, dive in, because those are skills that are going to keep giving you rewards as you go throughout your career in a pretty profound way.
Yeah. And, I would call out working in like DevOps if you're supporting .NET developers, like, understanding, errors that you get out of trying to do a build in a pipeline and understanding, how to fix that. It's useful to know .NET stuff.
Definitely it is. I want to ask you, what are 3 of your favorite modules?
Oh, I was not ready for that question.
I know. I told you all the things and that was not on it. I like to catch people a little bit off the cuff.
All right. So I think PS module, that's not PowerShell get, PS module get. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Or PS resource. I'm sorry.
PS resource
get. I can't tell you how many years I cursed PowerShell get's name for not supporting NuGet v3. I spent probably half of my career complaining about that, and they finally fixed it with PS resource get. So that is one of my favorite modules.
Good call.
Yeah. Would you say? Would you say?
PoshBot, perhaps?
PoshBot was great until I learned how to write my own bots.
Yeah.
In other languages. And that's not me saying it's not a good module. It's a great module. If you know PowerShell, it's such a great way to, chat ops, right? For PowerShell and Teams, because of the Teams connector you wrote, or when I was using it, it was in Slack. I would say like all of the conversion modules, like I found a module a while back that does YAML. So, you convert to or from JSON, like whatever module those are in, like I love the data type conversions. And then finding a convert to and from YAML in the PowerShell gallery, like that was very powerful for me. And I know that might seem kind of cliche, but what I love about PowerShell is it is object based. Like you have the pipeline, you have objects, and that's all you need. You have an amazing language, and I've never found that anywhere else. And so to be able to convert to and from different types, if you've got a CSV file, like, well, man, I need a JSON file, CSV and JSON, don't typically convert to and from those, but being able to do that in PowerShell with, a one-liner is great.
Boom. Now, another question I didn't prepare you for. What is one time something went wrong with PowerShell, maybe a big mistake you made, and what did you learn from it?
This is a kind of a funny one. So when I was, which job was this at? It doesn't remember. It doesn't really matter. I was at a job where I was working on this was back before my favorite feature in PowerShell 7. There's two of them. It's the as hash table and convert from JSON, and it's also the for each parallel. Like those are my two favorite features. Like that is why I started using PowerShell 7 and advocating for it. Now, but before like the for each parallel was a thing, there was PoSh RS jobs.
Yeah. So
run space jobs. And so I was building a framework around that to where I still remember this. I had whatever current gen of Surface Pros there were. I had one of those. I hated it because I was, it wasn't strong enough for me in my opinion. But I was running as many concurrent jobs in PowerShell to talk to remote systems, either servers or end user devices. And so what I could do is within a few minutes I could push out like any script, like a GP update's a good example, to every single device on the network. And what I made the mistake of at one point was, man, I wish I remember what command it was. I ran a command on all of our servers. And what that command also did was it also rebooted the server. I think it might have been one of the something from PS Windows Update. I honestly don't remember. But because it did it so fast, because I was running like 50 concurrent jobs, I literally had to take the case off of my Surface Pro and like fan it with my hand because it was overheating. But because it did it so fast, like our monitoring didn't even tell us until I was like halfway through all our servers or something.
Holy crap.
I was like, oh crap, sorry guys. And this is back when I was working in person. And so there's just a room and there's like 15 or 20 of us. My boss goes, hey Anthony, that script you're writing that you didn't think needed a change request for, why is it rebooting servers?
Wow. That is a nice little stressful day. Wake you up.
Yeah. I mean, thankfully nothing broke. And we stopped it before it hit. And there was some critical, like, so this was when I worked at the credit units. There was some critical member facing services that, Control C, mash the C really quick and it stopped.
Yeah.
But that was one of the ones where I was like, anytime I'm ever like, do I need to test this script before I run it at scale? The answer is always yes.
Yeah.
Like, and so after that, like I had like just a couple of servers where I knew like, one of them was like the admin tools server, another one was like the jump box or, those kind of things where I knew if it rebooted in the middle of the day, like 5 people would care and they were all in that room. They would be like, hey, why did you kick me out of my session kind of thing. And so that was my like test servers for that kind of thing.
Live and learn. That's what they say. We all have those stories where things kind of, the spaghetti hits the fan, I think is the phrase.
Yeah, indeed.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you everybody out there for listening. It's been an amazing interview. And we're here every single Monday. And you know what? We're also here every single Wednesday for PowerShell Wednesdays. So I like to think, like, if you're trying to grow in your career, check out the PowerShell podcast for some ideas of how people have done it. If you want to learn hands-on PowerShell, come to PowerShell Wednesdays and get demos and see the actual code. Obviously, it's not so fitting for an audio-based podcast to see code on the screen. So that's what PowerShell Wednesdays kind of fit into things. And just get engaged in the community. Anthony, people have enjoyed you. They've enjoyed you. One more plug for us. Where can we find you on social media and the World Wide Web?
Thanks for that, Andrew. I'm the PoSh Wolf. That's what I go by online. So I'm on GitHub as the PoSh Wolf, Twitter, X as the PoSh Wolf, my blog, theposhwolf.com, LinkedIn, the PoSh Wolf, Blue Sky, the PoSh Wolf. I'm not active on socials a lot. You can still find me. You can still follow me and see when I post. I think I mentioned earlier, I got 4 kids and a full-time job. So posting is like, the very low priorities.
I feel that. I try and be consistent. It's hard to do. It's hard to be consistent with the posting.
Dude, it would be a lot easier if my work paid for me to do it.
Definitely.
I'm a little jealous of that.
Yes, I feel you there. I'm very fortunate. One more thing.
Yeah.
Give people one tip out there. Could be PowerShell, could be life. Give them one little piece of advice, one little nugget to sit in their brain all day as they go about their PowerShell coding.
I think for me, what has driven my career, we talked about, Discord, like writing a bot for Discord. Like I never had a professional reason to do that. Like my boss didn't say, hey, I know we use Teams, but can you write a Discord bot in PowerShell? Like don't be afraid to like pick a problem and just try to solve it with PowerShell, even if PowerShell is not the right tool. I mean, for me, it evolved into using some, from PowerShell to C# to Go. But don't be afraid to pick a problem, even if it's one that either isn't a solution for, and just trying to solve it with PowerShell, because you'll find that you learn things that have other applications. And just a plug for the PowerShell Wednesday, if you haven't heard about it, all this .NET stuff is where I got what I got from that, and then eventually use that to learn C#.NET, and it was much easier to do that because I had put in that work to do that.
Yep. And once you start learning about other kind of ancillary technologies to PowerShell, it kind of fills in the gap because there's a lot of shared patterns between all these different things. And then you can bring this maturity and knowledge to your work and experience and confidence. So definitely worth diving in. Great tip.
Yep. Every once in a while I'll say something, something, well, that's not going to work. And someone's like, well, how do you know? It's like, well, I had this side project I did. It didn't work in that. So it probably won't work here either.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody out there for listening. I'm Andrew Pla at Andrew Pla Tech. Check me out on socials, andrewpla.tech/links if you want to find all the different links I got going on there. I want to shout out our sponsors, PDQ. Check out pdq.com/podcast to get a little demo of Connect. No sign up needed. And thank you everybody. Join discord.gg/PDQ. Check us out in the PowerShell scripting channel. You got to get involved in the community in one way or another. Introduce yourself, wherever that may be. If that's the PDQ Discord, if that's at the Research Triangle PowerShell user groups, wherever it is, you got to get in where you fit in. You got to take that first step. I recently had someone reach out to me saying, hey, do you offer some mentorship? And unfortunately, I'm a little bit booked up now. My biggest tip to them, though, was that. And whenever I am mentoring people, I'm happy to answer your questions, but you really need to find out a more consistent method for getting these questions answered. Give me a little bit of guidance, because people like Anthony, they've been on this journey for a while. And they've learned, as you've heard, the hard way a couple of times. And to be able to force multiply and share that knowledge that we've learned, that's what we're all going for. So if you don't ask, we can't answer. So get out there, get involved. Thank you, everybody. See you next week on the PowerShell podcast. PowerShell Wednesdays, 2 p.m. Eastern. Got it all. Thank you, Anthony Howell, the PoSh Wolf. Oh!
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Yes,
appreciate
take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.